Today's warm-ups, we're going to be continuing to practice these same skills. We're going to be substituting in for the variables, and we are going to be using rational numbers, and of course, as always, we need to follow the order of operations. The very first thing we need to do is substitute in. Okay, so I'm going to try this again. I think my dogs have stopped barking. Well, one or two barks in the background, I guess, won't interrupt us. So we are going to substitute in for those variables. So the first thing, of course, I see is an A. So I'm going to put -1/2. Now, it is important that I put this in parentheses for when it's squared, because otherwise it means something different, which we'll talk about later on when we talk about exponents. But it is very important that you put the entirety of this number inside parentheses before you square it. Okay, so carrying on, we now are going to have the quantity of A plus B, which is -1/2, plus B, which is -8. And the entirety of that divided by 3 times the quantity of -8 times 4/5 minus C, which is -10. And there is the problem we have to do. Okay, so the very first thing, of course, as always, is the parentheses. Now, inside the parentheses, we're going to have to look around a little bit. We do keep in mind that whatever we see above the denominator and below the denominator should be considered in parentheses, but we are going to start out with the expression that's directly in parentheses, and the only one that is doing that is this one right here. Well, the entirety of this in parentheses, -8 times 4/5 minus -10, but we know between multiplication and subtraction, the first thing we do is multiply. So that's -8. I'm going to put that over 1 times 4/5. I keep the top with the top and the bottom with the bottom. So that's -8 times 4, which of course is -32. And 1 times 5 is 5. And from that, I'm going to subtract -10. Well, the first thing I want to do with that, of course, is to change. So I've got -32/5 change. The subtraction becomes addition. Change again, that -10 becomes +10. So this is the new expression that's actually inside that parentheses. So I am going to continue dealing with this on this page because I do have some room over here to set up my organizer, because I am now adding 2 fractions, which obviously we know that 10 is not in a fraction form right now, but we're going to make it in such. Because remember, I love eating apples and avocados. So I is my improper fractions. So I've got -32/5 is already as an improper fraction. And that 10 plus 10 over 1 in its improper fraction form. The least common multiple of 5 and 1, of course, is 5. And I know that I'm going to want both of these fractions to be over some number, over the number 5, some number over 5. -32/5 already has that. And I'm going to add that to some other number over 5. So, of course, I say to myself, how do I get from 1 to 5? I multiply times 5. 10 times 5 is 50. Okay, so now that we have our equivalent fractions, we can ignore the denominators and simply do what it says to do in the numerators. So that says -32 plus 50. I have an addition problem. The signs are different. Find the difference. I'm going to find these absolute values. Of -32 is 32 and a +50 is 50. I'm finding the difference. So that means I'm going to do 50 minus 32. I know that, of course, is 18. And the larger absolute value is 50. So that means it's going to be positive. So +18. I now have my numerator and my denominator. So that's 18/5. So that, of course, is 18/5 is what's equal to this set of parentheses right here. So obviously I need to go another page to rewrite what I now have to do. So I've still got -1/2 squared plus -1/2 plus -8 divided by 3 times 18/5. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, even though we know we are going to eventually treat this numerator, what's in the numerator, and this, what's in the denominator, as if they're in parentheses, they're not technically in parentheses. So I'm going to get rid of those, even though I just drew them. And I'm going to focus on what's next. And next in my order of operations, of course, is my exponents. I have one set of exponents right here, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ignore this for right now. This is -1/2 squared, so I know that means it's -1/2 times -1/2. I keep the top with the top and the bottom with the bottom. That means I've got 1 times 1 is 1, and 2 times 2 is 4. 2 negatives, that's an even number of negatives, so my answer is positive. I'm going to bring the rest of this problem down. So I've got that plus -1/2 plus -8 in the numerator. In the denominator, I've got 3 times 18/5. So, like I said earlier, we are now going to treat the top part of this and the bottom as if they are also in parentheses, because we need to solve each of those before we can divide. So if I come over to here, I know that I've got -1/2 plus -8. Now, I know that we, in general, we change those, we use our acronym of I love eating apples and avocados, but sometimes we need to stop and look at the problem we have in front of us before just following all of the steps blindly without thinking. I've got 2 negative numbers here. I've got a whole number and I've got a fraction. 2 negative numbers, that means which I'm adding together. That means the signs are the same. Find the sum. And I'm finding the sum of a whole number and a fraction. So I can simply do 8 plus 1/2, which we know is 8 1/2, and that should be negative. So that's what's going to come over here for the numerator, if you will. And that's going to be divided by, well, let's bring this over here. I've got 3 over 1. Remember, when I multiply, I want both of my numbers to be in their fraction or improper fraction form. And that's 3 times 18/5. Neither one of them are negative. They're both positive. So I keep the top with the top and the bottom with the bottom. I know that 3 times 18 is 54. And 1 times 5 is 5. I really am going to make my life easy and just leave that in its fraction form. I'm not going to change it into an improper fraction, or excuse me, a mixed number, because I know that eventually I'm just going to have to change it back, and that, quite frankly, is silly. So, don't forget to bring the rest of that problem down. I've got 1/4 plus, this is where I'm at right now, 1/4 plus -8 1/2 divided by 54/5. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, obviously I'm going on to the next page, but I am going to rewrite that so it looks a bit different and probably more what we're used to looking at. So I've got 1/4 plus -8 1/2 divided by 54/5. Which is how we're used to looking at division of fractions. But it's important that you get used to seeing both versions of that and understand that they really mean the same thing. So I no longer have any parentheses. I no longer have any exponents. So the next thing I need to do is multiply and divide in order from left to right. So I've got some division to deal with right here. I know if I'm going to divide fractions, the very first thing I need to do is change that mixed number into an improper fraction. So that becomes 8 times 2 is 16 plus 1 more is 17. Don't forget the negative sign. Negative 17 halves divided by 54 fifths. I've got my math Macarena whenever I divide. First we will divide, keep the first, flip the second, then you multiply. Keep the top with the top and the bottom with the bottom. So when I do that, I've got negative 17 times 5. I know what some of you are thinking, but you don't need the calculator. 10 times 5 is 50. 7 times 5 is 35. 50 plus 35, of course, is 85. I do know that a negative and a positive, when I multiply them together, that's one negative number, which is odd, so therefore I keep my negative. 2 times 54. 2 times 50 is 100. 2 times 4 is 8. It's 108 in the denominator. So now I'm going to bring that right over here. And I'm now going to have 1/4 plus negative 85. Didn't really need to put that in parentheses, but out of habit I did. Over 108. So the next thing I want to do here is figure out, I'm going to, of course, use my graphic organizer. I love eating apples and avocados. So my I is actually already done. Here it is. This is my I right here. Already done for us. They are both already in their fraction form. So all I really need to do is to say to myself, what is the least common multiple, or the LCM, of 4 and 108? Well, you might be saying to yourself, I don't know my 108 tables, but you truly don't need to. All you want to think about, does 4 go into 108? It sure does, because 4 goes into 100, and 4 also goes into 8. So we know it goes into 108, and that means my least common multiple can be 108. So I'm going to have some number over 108 plus, well, we already know what the next number is. It's going to be negative 85 over 108. So the only thing I do need to figure out is from here to here. How do I get from 4 to 108? We've already talked about this. We know that 4 goes into 100. How many times? 25. And 4 goes into 8. How many times? 27. Or 2 times, and 25 plus 2 is 27. So 1 times 27, of course, is 27. So now I ignore my denominators, and I now have 27 plus negative 85. The signs are different. Find the difference. So when I'm finding the difference, I know I find the absolute value of each. Absolute value of 27 is 27. Absolute value of negative 85 is 85. So when I subtract, I've got 85 minus 27. 85 minus 20 is 65. Take away 7 more, and that gives me 58. My larger absolute value, of course, is that 85, so that means it's negative 58. I've got my denominator, I've got my numerator, I've got negative 58 over 108. So that is my answer. However, let's think about that for a minute. Negative 58 over 108. Both of those numbers are even, so we've got to be able to reduce this. Half of 58. Well, half of 50 is 25. Half of 8 is 4. So that means my numerator is going to be negative 29, because that's 25 plus 4 more. Half of 108. Half of 100 is 50. Half of 8 is 4. So my numerator, or my denominator, is 54. And there is my final answer, negative 29 54ths.